Hey, it's Midnight Raven, and it's True Crime with Raven. And today we're looking at the Potsdam murder. So, this was the death of a young boy, and this case has so many twists and turns that this is a 4-part video. Each video is going to contain details, evidence, and then there's going to be an extra video giving you new evidence that has since been found. So, join me as we look into the death of Garrett Phillips, a 12-year-old boy. This is part 1 of 4, and I hope you will enjoy each individual part where it gives you more details, more evidence, and looks into the case of the death of this little boy. So, late afternoon on the 24th of October 2011, the police knocked on the door of a second-floor flat that was home to a 12-year-old boy called Garrett Phillips. His mother Tandy and his half-brother Aaron also lived at the flat, but once the police knocked at the flat, there was no answer from anybody. The police were called to the house by a concerned neighbor who 10 minutes earlier had reported hearing a disturbance and cries for help. They located the caretaker of the building, and once a master key had arrived, the police would open the apartment and found a boy barely alive. His name was Garrett Phillips. He was a 12-year-old boy and was then sent to hospital. Garrett, the young boy, unfortunately was shortly pronounced dead by doctors less than 2 hours after he had been found laying on his floor in the house, barely alive. An autopsy would reveal that the boy had died from strangulation and suffocation. He had scratches on his face, a black eye, and had injuries to his ear. The police who responded to the neighbors' calls confirmed that there was no forced entry into the building and no one else was in the apartment when the police arrived. His mother and his brother had been at a basketball game and had the only thing strange at the house may have been that there was an open window, which seemed strange because it was in the month of October, a more colder season, of course. But the police concluded that Garrett's murderer had left the scene only shortly after possibly the police had arrived. The murderer had jumped 20 feet down onto the pavement, possibly through the open window. No one witnessed the escape, but DNA recovered from underneath Garrett's fingertips gave detectives some hope that Garrett's killer would be found. The town of Potsdam in the north of New York State, close to the Canadian border, were gripped by this 12-year-old boy who barely clung onto life and sadly died. The entire town was in grief for the death of Garrett. What happened over the next 5 years would lead to a dramatic trial of a young man and would spark questions about racial profiling and police corruption. This would later split the predominantly white community down the middle. And part 2 will give you more details on the crime, evidence, and the rest of this case. So I hope you will join me in part 2. These are very small videos because coming in part 2 and 3, there is a lot of details in this case. Predominantly in a white-based community, the murderer, you will find out in part 2, was technically harassed for being of a different color, and I want to give this case as much detail as possible to give you a full case view. So if you want to see part 2, this has been the Potsdam murder. This was the death of a 12-year-old boy called Garrett Phillips, who was left at home while his mother and his brother attended a basketball game, and then police found him dead after a neighbor called the police after hearing cries for help. If you want to see part 2, give it a big thumbs up and subscribe. If you want to help the channel become a member, donate to my PayPal. I'll give it a super chat because every donation goes to the research and the time I spend on doing these cases. And I will see you for part 2 very soon, where we will discover more about the murderer and more about the case. And I will see you for part 2 very soon. Take care and thanks for watching. Bye guys.